Hello, thank you everyone for joining in. Today we're joined by Eilidh Henderson of Page Park. She's Director of Arts and Culture and was awarded the RIAS Emerging Architect of the Year in 2018. She's going to talk to us today about her work with Page Park on their award-winning retrofit projects and how these projects created real change in their urban realm. So I'm going to hand you over to Eilidh just to talk and discuss some really exciting projects.
Thanks, Helen. I'll just share my screen. Tell me if you can.
And if you have any questions or so you want to ask Eilidh, just pop those in the chat and we can answer them at the end. We have 15 minutes or so for any questions. Okay, so just let us know.
Brilliant. Thanks, Helen. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can, Ms. Brand.
Fab. Okay, well, thanks very much for inviting me along to share my thoughts with you today on retrofit projects, as Helen said. And just before I start, I think, as I've said to you offline, Helen, that you've really established a remarkable lecture series here and a place, I suppose, for us all to come together in spite of the challenges that we're facing. So that should be commended. So well done to all of you for making this all happen. So I've got a challenge tonight to follow in Andrew's footsteps of his great talk that he did last week. I think it'll be quite interesting to parallel our practices approaches, particularly from a sustainability perspective. So as Helen said, my brief for the talk really was to share some of our experience at Page Park of reworking existing buildings. And I suppose acting to reduce our carbon footprint is necessary for all of us as individuals and as collectives. But our approach, I suppose, at Page Park is really to seek to reuse as much as possible of what already exists. But to do that, we must be able to look forward. And when you sit down and think about that, particularly in the world that we're in today, you realise the difficulties of anticipating future weeks and months ahead, let alone anything further than that. So how then do we apply a degree of science to the speculations we might have on the future of our built environment? These are just a selection of projects as a backdrop that we've worked on with existing buildings. And I suppose one way that we do is to look back and imagine what we thought would happen and then draw some observations and interpret some generalisations for the future. And you could say, I suppose, as a practice, we adopt the belief of looking back to look forwards. We use all available physical and digital resources to research and collate a history of a place, whether a building or setting. And this really lends us a better understanding of how that setting has developed in response to historical, social and economic factors, and how it was shaped by contemporary thinking. Looking back also gives us some insight into the present-day identity of a setting, because we often find that memorability of a building or a setting today actually stems from that historical identity. It gets a bit trickier when the identity of a place is hard to characterise, preserved by memories rather than by a physical building or place. It then is much more liable to become fragile and much easier to lose. So we have to work hard to hold on to those memories and ingrain them in our built environment contributions. So thinking about tonight and reflecting on our projects, in a sense, our towns and cities, in my mind, could be thought of as jigsaw puzzles. We've all completed a jigsaw. We understand the frustrations when a piece is too faded and you can't decipher quite how it fits in. We understand the challenge when a piece is missing, when an edge is ill-defined, when adjacent pieces are so similar you can't figure out how they shape a cohesive picture. Our built environment is similar. There are often gaps that need filled, offset angles and geometries that prevent pieces slotting into place. There might be fresh pieces that don't join up. Sometimes there's lots to work with and sometimes there's not much. So when we start to pick a project apart, we try to pick the jigsaw apart, the jigsaw that it's part of apart, and that forces and understand the forces, I suppose, that have shaped that jigsaw's evolution, because every single project has a history. When we then begin to look forward in our projects, we focus really on differentiation. I think as a society, we've got an onus on us not to be accepting of a one-size-fits-all approach, which often results in monotony and provokes no interest. Within it. And our whole jigsaw should really be seen then as this inspirational platform or backdrop for the future. Is my internet okay? Sorry, Helen, I've just got a signal to say it's a wee bit wobbly.
Yeah, it went a wee bit off there, but it's fine, I can hear you again.
You can hear me, sorry about that. So tonight, I'm just going to share with you 3 pieces of jigsaws that we've been involved in renewing. I think renewal is probably quite a key word in this. These projects span probably the length of the country, but they're all cultural projects. As Helen said, I work predominantly in the cultural sector. Each of these projects follow 4 steps of our project methodology, if you like, which is firstly to understand the heritage of a place, which I've spoken about. But it's also really important to understand how these existings work today. Thirdly, we talk to people, because it's really important to understand memories and also challenges and frustrations, and importantly, aspirations for the future. And finally, before starting, we seek to understand the data or metrics to back the project up. That could be through a parallel business case, visitor analytics, or by establishing financial boundaries of a project. So the first project that I'm going to share with you tonight is Edinburgh Printmakers, that some of you might have seen recently because it's won a few awards. And in jigsaw terms, this project was absolutely about renewal. There was a faded piece, but it had gaps all around it. Established in 1967 as the first open access studio in the UK, Edinburgh Printmakers is an arts charity specialising in printmakers. And their new building opened to the public in April 2019. The interesting bit about their site was that the building that they sought to occupy was the former North British Rubber Company building, which was the only surviving structure from a once large and important 19th century Castle Mills industrial complex, which is in Fountain Bridge in Edinburgh. At its height, the Rubber Company employed over 3,000 people and produced a vast array of products on the site, including the famous Hunter Welly boots. In 1856, when the rubber industry emerged, the site was actually occupied by the Castle's silk mills, and their buildings were predominantly located along the southern edge of the canal you can see here, so they were located in this area. But the Rubber Company came along and they actually bought the whole site. And the first piece that they constructed was this block here, which was in 1896, and then they extended it further down Gilmore Park, which is a street here, and returned it to this larger workshop building on Dundee Street. During the First World War, the mills ran 24 hours a day and produced over 1 million pairs of rubber boots for soldiers in the trenches. And this building was just one of many buildings in the broader Castle Mills complex. The Rubber Company continued to thrive here until 1969, when there was a devastating fire that destroyed the majority of the Victorian industrial buildings. So over the 4 years subsequent to that, the remains on site were cleared, leaving only this building. Then between around the 1970s and 2004, the site was taken over by a brewer before the council purchased the site again and cleared it when the industry again went into decline. And again, this building was the only remnant that survived what was a thriving industrial past. So we started to work with the printmakers in 2014, and their project involved the redevelopment of this derelict building into a multi-use arts complex that's centred around printmaking production. They developed a really exciting but ambitious brief for this new creative hub. And critically, though, they were keen to capture the characteristics of this space here that you can see, which was their existing facility at Union Street in Edinburgh. They wanted to expand their business, so to develop a much more inclusive facility for both the production and the display of art. So the accommodation that they aspired to achieve and has been delivered now includes 2 gallery spaces, a shop, cafe, learning studio, staff accommodation, environmentally controlled archives, 8 creative industry units, and an artist in residence flat, as well as their new large print studio. The facility they've got today is actually over twice the size of their previous premises in Edinburgh. So this was the building when we arrived on site in 2014. It was in a terrible state of repair, it's fair to say. But what was interesting was that in the visual on the left, the building was really seen as being a central cultural piece and a much broader vision for redevelopment of the remaining post-industrial site. And this was for a new neighbourhoods, which included housing, a school, retail and commercial enterprises. Unfortunately, the economic challenges meant that the development of the other sites didn't take off in tandem with the delivery of our new creative hub as had been planned. So the time we started work, the building was, as I mentioned, in a really terrible condition. There was extensive wet and dry rot throughout. The roof was leaking badly. The windows were damaged. The floors were not structurally sound by any stretch of the imagination. So that was really where we started. That was what we had to address. How did we move on from this point? And I think our approach was to be very, very careful with this building. It has an incredible heritage, both embedded in the building fabric and through memories of people who'd worked in the industry, or the industries that have existed on the site. We were really keen that those weren't lost or forgotten through the redevelopment. Instead, we wanted to try and expose the story of the building, but still allow for this new use. And this was central to the architectural concept that we had, was to make really precise interventions to facilitate this new use while respecting the character and story of the existing building. The first architectural move was to think about the new entrance. Where was that to be located? And I suppose our first move was to move it round the corner onto Dundee Street, which is a really key artery for people into the city of Edinburgh. And this new entrance provides level access into the building, but also creates a public space for the printmakers and offers views directly from the street into 2 new galleries. By creating this large window, passers-by can then engage with the exhibitions inside without even having to go into the building. And we really enjoy the potential for unintentional interaction with art like this. It really enriches the streetscape and creates a dialogue between, in this instance, the printmakers and the city. So just looking at the plan quickly, the new you enter in from Dundee Street here into the gallery number 2 with the shop, a new really large lift which facilitated both access for visitors but also for goods and materials to the upper levels, with a new staircase then linking up. This part of the building was then dedicated to support functions, so office accommodation, climate controlled environmental archives and storage space for the galleries. And when you rise then up to the what is the upper ground floor, as we refer to it, you then enter up the staircase or the lift into this much more buzzy cafe bar hub, as we refer to it. There's the double height space, the gallery at ground floor that you saw from the street, and then this mezzanine gallery that overlooks the shop below. I think that overlooking is a really key aspect in terms of orientation for visitors to the building. This part of the building again was dedicated to a large education facility, more staff accommodation, and then a sort of detached but attached creative industries hub. So there was these 8 creative industry units that bolted on and really benefited from all the great amenity that the printmakers have in their part of the building. And I think you'll see on the plan, this part here is actually a new extension, and this new extension subtly shifts the centre of gravity of the new building to create a central courtyard around which all of the building users can then meet and interact. It's a really simple and effective strategy which ensures all the circulation inside to all of the 6 levels within this complex historic building are accessible to all. At the first floor then sits their amazing print studio, which is in an expansive triple height space which was formerly the joinery workshop in the rubber factory. The new print studio, as I mentioned, is 50% larger than the previous print studio, taking up all of this space with further creative industry units located over here. And for me, I think this section really encapsulates the core essence of the project, engaging with the street and opening up this new shop front. You come into this buzzy shop and gallery space, linking up to then the ground floor cafe bar. But actually having this raised room, this beautiful room on stilts that you get glimpses into, and you can access just up through the stairs and lift a beautiful room for work, for the production of art. And in this room, as in the wider building, repair works were carried out, but the patina of the 150 years of occupation was maintained. Historic joist pockets within the raw brick walls are retained. The original muscular cast iron structure and timber trusses are all left exposed, and marks of the previous interior paint colours are left untouched. Our approach was really not to whitewash away the many stories of this space, but instead to allow a new layer of occupation to add to the ongoing narrative. Where the original fabric was no longer required, it was repurposed. So original glazed bricks found behind layers of plaster in the basement were reused at the ground floor to make this the servery counter in the cafe. Large timber doors salvaged from the old joinery workshop were reimagined as tabletops in the cafe. And new bespoke shop fittings were crafted from birch plywood, wax steel and black rubber, and a nod to the industrial heritage. This is a wee video that you can see, which will just allow you to get a better flavour for the building. So you can see this sort of quite subtle interventions to get that new entrance. I'll talk a little bit more about this piece in a wee moment. New cafe bar, which is really the heart of the building, which overlooks the courtyard. The amazing flexible gallery space. This was the opening exhibition that you see in this video. And then the mezzanine gallery, which overlooks the entrance below, peering down to the shop with all the bespoke shop units that we also designed. And then at first floor level, this buzzy workspace with a kitchen which overlooks this incredible studio, which is the heart of the art production. So in addition to the changing exhibitions in the two gallery spaces, the printmakers also commissioned 3 public artworks that were designed to be an integral part of the architectural design in the building fabric. The brief for the artists asked them to explore the rich heritage of the building and the history of the surrounding area, and then use the building as a matrix for a large-scale work. The intention being that the permanent artworks would enable visitors to navigate around the building and interact with the hidden histories. And as architects, we're really interested in the idea of memory in architecture and how buildings, specifically our built fabric, can bear witness to and perpetuate a long forgotten past. When doing some historical research for the building, the project architect came across this quote about Castle Mills from the early 20th century. At the inner end of the canal stands the industrial township of the North British Rubber Company, with all its modern efficiency, its bewildering technical processes, and its outpouring stream of commodities necessary for the modern way of life, and yet somehow harmonious with the area in which it stands. It seems quite incredible that all of this is now gone. We were really fortunate, though, to have been involved in creating one of these bespoke art installations in the building. This was the design of our EP scope, as we called it. We were interested in creating a viewing device that would allow you to see into the heart of this building at the first floor and share the past, present and future. And the result is this sort of hybrid periscope kaleidoscope. It's a periscope that provides a view of the print studio from the public cafe below. But this view is overlaid with images of products made by the rubber company that shift and move to form kaleidoscopic patterns as you turn the wheel. So images of past industrial production are overlaid with a contemporary view of artistic production. And there's an intimacy inherent in this piece asking questions of past life and the lives of those who once knew Fountain Bridge as a thriving industrial centre. One turn of the wheel brings to life a myriad of objects that refract and collide with warped images of the print studio to create an infinity of patterns that are at once obtuse and accurate, a bit like a memory. The next project that I'm going to share with you is down in Leeds. And I can click on. It's a really fascinating one in terms of jigsaw, because in a sense, this jigsaw piece was dislodged and it needed reshaped to fit the gap and to inspire change round about it. Because the building that existed turned its back on the two key arteries that connected the theatre to the city centre of Leeds. In the beginning, the project seemed to us a bit like a labyrinth of seemingly unsolvable problems. It was built facing the wrong direction because it was intended to address a wider development that never materialised. It was designed in the 1980s and the interiors had really grown quite tired. And the site topography had resulted in complex levels and a convoluted and inaccessible entrance sequence. It was designed by the Appleton Partnership and opened in 1990. And the building contains at its heart two incredible theatre spaces called the Quarry, which is a fan-shaped tiered auditorium, and the Courtyard Theatre, a galleried flexible space with a retractable seating bank, which was considered a seminal design at the time. So I suppose we sought to try and untangle this challenge, and circulation was really a key part of that. We wanted to also assert the building to the city and to create a more inclusive experience that would bolster the resilience of the organisation, critically in doing so, unlocking these valuable performance rooms which sit at the heart of the building. So with the city of Leeds undergoing a period of significant investment and change, including a renewed focus on the value of culture and major new developments in the vicinity of the theatre, this was really a timely opportunity for Leeds Playhouse to address the significant issues with their existing building. The completed project today includes a new entrance extension in gold here, which rotates and faces the city for the first time. It faces onto St Peter's Street and has a new pedestrian crossing, which then connects across to the city. The existing original entrance opens now onto Playhouse Gardens, which have been completed as a new landscape setting, which really enhance the building setting hugely. So when you move inside the building, you enter now into a cafe foyer on the ground floor of the extension, and that cafe really anchors that new entrance and animates the building at street level. The new cafe is composed of a really simple palette of robust materials, mainly timber and painted metal in neutral tones. These were chosen to dress the surfaces of many of the key spaces. The rhythm and tactility of the bespoke slatted plywood ceilings to the extension and connecting link helped to relieve the low ceiling height that we were left with as part of the existing building. But they also concealed and provided access to the myriad of mechanical and electrical services that sit above. And rationalising circulation was really a key part of this, as I mentioned. We've created now a defined route through the building, which offers the prospect of chance encounters with people and engagement with the performing arts and other activities hosted by the Playhouse. But crucially, it simplifies access to the theatres. These are images just of these new routes, with encouraging places for people to pause and for people to meet and to gather as they percolate through the building. How to better integrate wheelchair and companion spaces into the theatres was really also a critical move. The Quarry Theatre on the plan on the right is the main theatre in the building, and the existing arrangement was to enter through these doors at the top and face a severe drop down to the stage below, with very limited options for accessible seating positions. So having observed the difficulties of accessing at the top of this steep break and the segregation of wheelchair users and their companions at the periphery of the auditorium, we proposed a new vomitory entrances at mid-tier level to enable everyone to enter the space unassisted and to embed the wheelchair and companion positions within the body of the audience. These new entrances then relate to a new foyer and route through the core of the building to more closely connect the theatre spaces and encourage movement and exploration. The sections on the left are of the courtyard theatre, and the client ambition here was to increase the seating capacity by introducing a shallower rake of fixed seating in the stalls, and working with venue consultants, a new arrangement was developed to provide an extra 3 rows of seating, which you can see in the right hand of this image here. And on the left, the revamped Quarry Theatre. I love this space. I think as a practice in all of our projects, you seek to squeeze out every single bit of potential in our projects, particularly when you're working with existing buildings. And this space is a great example of this. This is a former basement that was basically a leftover as the existing building tried to negotiate the topography of the site, and has now been transformed, believe it or not, into this space. A new flexible performance space. There was a lot of discussion in the development of this space called the Bramwell Rock Void about the nature of this as an as-found performance space. And we really sought to maintain the rawness of the existing brickwork and concrete soffits to create a heightened sense of entering into the bowels of the building as you move into this experiential theatre room. The facade, this is probably many of you will have seen again on social channels and things like that. But I suppose this was about making a new face for a building, and despite being diminutive in scale against the neighbouring buildings, the new entrance has an assertive presence on St Peter Street, in part due to the roofline of the symbolic Playhouse capital letters. In simple terms, we identified that the building needed a new billboard. It needed a new, vibrant face that addressed the city and the people of the city. The use of the ceramics externally really roots the facade in the strong local tradition and leads of ceramic and faience that you see around the city. In our research on the historical context of the site, we learned about the Burmatoff's pottery with their colourful ceramics, which were made locally but exported globally. And we discovered that an appropriate synergy with the Playhouse productions, that they were very frequently local in content, yet focused on universal themes that then allowed them to be toured nationally and internationally. The ceramic material itself enabled us to exploit the plasticity of the material to create a 3-dimensional facade that alters with light conditions, and the trapezoidal forms link back to the geometries of the original building. And as professional storytellers, the Playhouse pushed us to develop a really strong narrative behind the pattern of these panels. And the idea emerged of the actor standing on the stage being represented in the patterning of each of the 4 panels, with each panel depicting one of the 4 main studio spaces. Excuse me. The Quarry, the Courtyard, the Bramwell Rock Void, and the Barber Studio. Once you see this, you'll not be able to unsee it, but the black or the darker tiles in each of the panels represents the actor looking out as this image to their audience, with the fading colours into darkness. Each panel is then lit from the bottom, representing the stage footlights, with the light fading out as your eye again rises up the panels. The motif of the ceramic elements was then referenced internally. We were really fortunate to be able to design all of the graphics and wayfinding inside the building as well, which starts to create a really strong holistic visual identity for the Playhouse, resonating with their new branding. And even before the Playhouse had officially reopened, this entrance facade had created a real buzz on social media, heightening the anticipation of the theatre's reopening. You can see here, so that was just some of the application of some of the graphics that we did inside. And here in its new setting, which is now starting to spring up round about it, this new proud face to the city, the really lovely landscape gardens, Playhouse Gardens. Leeds City College have then moved in next door, and there's further development planned in the coming months and years for this site at the back. So really the whole identity and positioning of the theatre in the city has shifted hugely. I like this sign. This light installation was actually put up as part of Leeds Light Night Festival, and particularly apt for this world that we're in at the moment. So they've just secured planning consent to keep it up as a permanent installation. But this is a view from that Playhouse Square or Gardens facing out back to the city. So the third and final project that I want to share with you tonight is the Great Tapestry of Scotland Gallery. This project is a wee bit different from the others that I've shared in that a significant part is actually involves a new build element, a new build that's been clipped onto an existing building. But the project also isn't complete, it's actually on site at the moment. But another commonality that it does have with the printmakers and Playhouse is that at its heart it has a beautiful room which is raised up from the ground floor. And in the jigsaw puzzle terms that we were thinking about, I suppose you could think of this as a really well-defined piece of puzzle, but again, it was faded and it needed refreshed. Gala as a town is going through a period of change, and the high street, as many are experiencing decline. So this was seen as sort of this idea of a droplet that could stimulate much broader change in the town. And the gallery at Galashiels is designed as the permanent home for the Great Tapestry of Scotland. The tapestry itself is a linear pictorial history of Scotland, depicting key events from the Ice Age through to the formation of the Scottish Parliament in 1999. It consists of these 160 panels, all roughly a metre squared in size, which are hung together to form a continuous banner. It is the world's longest tapestry at around 143 metres in length. The history of the tapestry was written by the historian Alistair Moffat, with each panel designed by the artist Andrew Crummy, and the grand vision imagined and made to happen by Alexander McCall-Smith. The tapestry has been travelling around Scotland for almost 6 years and has been hugely successful. The panels themselves were stitched by over 1,000 volunteer stitchers in community groups all over Scotland, but largely by women. So the starting point of this project, interestingly, had to be the tapestry and how to display such an extraordinarily long artwork. We considered a number of different gallery layout options, the simplest being a linear structure, where the viewer could simply walk up and down to view the tapestry. And this is really good in that you get to see the full length, which is really, really impressive. And you can also easily understand the exhibition from start to finish. However, it would create a really large and inefficient building form. It also creates quite a monotonous exhibition. So we started to look at a number of variations of the long wall display, but all were really quite space hungry and impractical. So we then moved on to look at more compact options, taking inspiration from one of the temporary tapestry exhibitions, which was held at the Scottish Parliament. And these more compact options involved creating a series of shorter walls arranged around a central open space. This option creates a much more practical and, as I mentioned, compact building form, but also breaks the exhibition down into more manageable chunks, which allows people to take natural breaks. And the central space in this arrangement also becomes really useful for orientation and for breakout. So the central concept of this building design started with the exhibition layout of these radial display cases around a central orientation space to accommodate the full length of the tapestry. As I mentioned, the site for the gallery is in the centre of Galashiels, which is in the Scottish borders. It sits on a street called Channel Street, which is the main shopping street in the town centre. And in recent years, the street's declined due to the number of out-of-town retail parks having a drastic impact, like many regional towns, on high streets. So our client, the Scottish Borders Council, we're really looking to use this building as a tool for regeneration, putting culture at the heart of town. In terms of the physical context, Gala Shields sits in a valley with the Gala water running through the centre of the town. And interestingly, you approach Gala from above and drop down into the town. So the roofscape of the town is quite important, particularly from the main approach road. The existing roofscape is characterised, as you can see here, by dormers and gables, chimneys and turrets, but set against the backdrop of the dramatic Eilidh Hills. This setting was a key influence on our building design. It's also worth noting that Gala Shields is a textile town, with the first reference to textile mills in the town tracing back to 1585. In the 19th century, it was a thriving town, producing nearly 1/5 of the output of the Scottish woolen industry. The success of the textile trade led to, sorry, my throat was going, I'm talking, hold on a second. I've obviously talked too much today. The success of the textile trade led to a rapid increase in the town's population, from 1,600 people in 1825 up to 18,000 people by 1891. At its height, there were more than 20 working mills in the town. So it seemed really appropriate to locate a tapestry gallery here in a town that was built on textiles. So part of our site, as I mentioned, involves an existing post office building on the right here. The post office opened to the public in 1896, and the architectural character is really quite grand. It's civic and very beautifully detailed. An architectural expression, if you like, of civic pride. There were very finely carved stone details done by a local company called Sutherland and Sons. And in our mind, the success of the textile trade in Gala is inextricably linked to the architecture of this building. So in designing our gallery, we were cognizant of this historical significance of the post office and how our building and the Great Tapestry might herald a new era of prosperity for Gala. So we've sought to evolve an architecture to reflect that ambition. So there were really three key influences to our approach to this project: the tapestry itself, the roofscape setting, and the crafted stonework of the context. We're really fortunate to have a model maker in-house as part of our studio. So we start all our projects by crafting models. And here we really focused on creating a great room with this extraordinary roof to hold the tapestry. The room sits and takes up the entire first floor of the building. And externally, we wanted to then create this dramatic roof geometry that would sit within this existing roofscape of pitched roofs, dormers and gables, but also signpost something new that would be visible as you arrive in Gala. At this first floor in the gallery, then you can see the radial arrangement of the display cases. We get the tapestry displayed on both the radial spines and the external walls. These divide the large gallery into a series of smaller gallery spaces with a central gathering space. The external walls then start to bend and fold in response to both the radial display and the roof geometry. Internally, this is an early visualisation. The roof has a complex and dramatic folded ceiling, a bit like origami, which rises up to a roof light in the centre to create an appropriately grand civic space. With the gallery being in the town centre, we wanted to take the opportunity to create views from the building and the gallery out into the town and beyond. So at each of the four corners of the gallery, you get a view that roots you in Gala. So, to the northeast corner, you get a view to the hills. To the northwest corner, a view to the Mac Art Centre. The southwest corner to the High Street, and then to the southeast to the Channel Street and the main approach to the building. This was again an early visual which shows the approach as you arrive at the building, and critically getting that view right up inside that first floor gallery and a glimpse of the dramatic folds of the ceiling. The ground floor then holds all the supporting spaces, including the cafe, shop, temporary gallery. And then the post office building that sits adjacent contains the education room, ground floor, which activates that street frontage and allows education activities to happen concurrently with the main gallery space. An important element of the gallery also was in creating a space for the stitchers to come and meet and to acknowledge their contribution. So Andrew Crummy is developing an artwork that will sit at the top of the new main staircase. And it's a huge woman, a stitcher, with strands of yarn coming from her and winding their way down the stairs of the entrance, with these strands containing the names of each of the stitchers involved in the making of the tapestry. Externally, then, we look to really reflect the architecture of the post office, but in a contemporary manner. So the new building is clad in sandstone, which is organised into vertical bands, reflecting the moulding of the post office facade. Every second band, though, is recessed to create depth on the facade and has a textured horizontal tooled finish to make reference to the pattern of the warp and weft of the woven textiles. As I said, it's on site, this project, so these are just some recent photos just showing how that's coming together. This was actually a model photo of that origami roof ceiling, and this is how it looks today. It's actually moved on from here, so the walls are now all sheeted and the crash deck to the roof lights come away, but you can see just how spectacular the geometry of that space is. And then from above, we've got some great drone footage showing the new roof light and the zinc roof. My throat's glad that we're reaching the end. Apologies for that. So yeah, just to wrap up, I suppose the projects I've shared today have in common these great rooms at their heart. Each of these have been raised up off the ground floor, which is quite interesting when you think of great Palladian courtyards that you enter and rise up to the Piano Nobile. Similarly, and closer to home, many of you will be familiar with the city chambers in Glasgow, where you enter and rise up the great stair to the state rooms. But it's nice to bring elements of those rooms to the ground floor, although we don't always have space. So in our projects, we work really hard to open up the ground floors to democratise access to our buildings, to engage with the settings that they sit within. And often with these existing buildings, we seek to give them a new front door as part of that approach, a billboard or an opening that hints at a new or rejuvenated life that lies within. I suppose in summary, in thinking about our approach to renewal, we need to look back. We must strive to understand our existing settings better than anybody else before we start, because to complete, start or refresh the jigsaws of our settings, we need to understand what they sought or seek to represent. That understanding then shapes our ability to look forwards, and our aim is to create settings that are more permeable, easier to move through, sociable, having found the thing that breathes life into a place, and more memorable. So in essence, I suppose it's a blend of four components we need to understand, which then informs the intuition, the intuitive responses that we all have when we go to site, which are then blended with these systems or data that give real certainty to our proposals. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, the people or the experience that is overlaid that ultimately each of our buildings are for. Thanks very much, and I welcome any questions that you might have. Sorry if I rattled through that too quickly.
Oh no, that was great, thank you. Can you just stop sharing your screen a wee moment and we'll open the floor to any questions. If you have any on, just pop them on the chat. That was really interesting to go through those projects and kind of see what you're all doing at Page Park. I guess I'll start the questions off. You talked a lot about culture and how cultural's role in regeneration of townscape and cityscape, and its relationship to the street, and how you said again how they're all on first floor. How do you go about designing a sort of new street base and trying to get culture in sort of the hub of these cities and getting people to interact more with these cultural institutions.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think with every project, there's layers in every cultural project. You know, you're generally dealing with creatives who have their own ideas and their own art form, if you like. So they've often got really brilliant ideas on how you share and how you get that cultural aspect out into the cities. What we've found in recent years is that what the existing buildings that they're housed in do is they sort of limit that ability for them to penetrate a broader audience in the city or townscapes, and so I think, as you say, this sort of need to carve new front doors and really give them an identity is often a really critical part. We also find, though, that you know, one project that springs to mind just thinking about Leeds Playhouse was actually another project we're working on in Leeds, which is Hyde Park Picture House, which is a really lovely cinema. It's sort of a vibe a bit like GFT in Glasgow, but they have just undertaken their own programme of actually taking their art form out into the city and popping up in other organisations or unexpected places. And I think it's about supporting them to think like that, to think creatively about how they can take their culture beyond the realms or the edges of their limitations, I suppose, of their building footprint. But yeah, I suppose as architects, we've got to, I think democratic access is probably the critical factor in terms of getting people in, particularly with museums. I think there's a huge portion of society who think they're maybe elitist and they maybe don't belong there. So I think that part in Edinburgh Printmakers where you go in the front door and there's really clear sight lines and views, so you can see up to other layers. You can see from the street straight in, so you can understand the different components, which starts to break down all these barriers and make people feel a bit more welcome and comfortable entering the building. So there's lots of wee tricks we can do like that, just to open up and support people to move through buildings, which I think is a really, really key part of cultural buildings particularly.
Yeah, I was asking one thing as well that kind of drew me to like Leeds Playhouse. I didn't realise at first that was a retrofit, because the main image you see is that really like
front door,
like the sad that like front door, and how that now like addresses the street, and it's also kind of vibrant use of colour.
Yeah.
Is that something that you kind of explore quite a lot in practice? Because usually colour isn't something that is explored much in architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, and no, it's not something that we get to do often. I think again, it was partly understanding the city and understanding that heritage of faience, as they refer to it in Leeds. You know, these beautiful ceramic tiles that they have in their buildings, sometimes on the outside or often on the outside, but also often internally. You know, and even in Glasgow, you have the stair closes, which often use these gorgeous ceramic tiles, which are full of colour, but you would never see them applied to the outside of the tenements, would you? So I think that was a really brilliant opportunity. But as you say, interesting that people assumed that it was a complete new build, when actually that we added on effectively a small front porch. You know, it was a tiny new part that we added, and it was all about untangling this complexity that lay within this existing building. So I think it's all that's from a sustainability perspective. Again, I think that we really strive to do as much as we can without adding too much new on, you know, just in terms of carbon footprint. You know, how can we just really make that existing bit work harder, and maybe it is about clipping on a new piece, which often also, you know, you get these sort of the battery pack model, as we refer to it, where sometimes the existing buildings just need a better circulation core to facilitate access to much bigger areas of the building. And that then allows us to embellish or add this new face, which in turn stimulates people to revisit the building that they've maybe not been to for years. So yeah, I think colour, we would love to do more and explore it on other projects. And again, it's just about the client and the context, understanding the historic context, the existing context, the planning context. All of these matters. So But absolutely all for a bit of joy in our cities.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been to, if you've ever been to Porto, because they have all these beautiful like ceramic.
Absolutely, yeah, Gort, absolutely, that's a great example.
Yeah, I've just got another question in. What's the most interesting part of cultural design? Do you have any sort of like hints or tricks that you do, or just kind of principles that you have when you go through and designing these cultural buildings?
I think I mean, this goes without saying in all our projects, but people, I think, are, every project, when we start this, it's not about our vision, it's about their vision. It's about us designing something that they can take ownership for. And I think that's critical. It's difficult, I suppose, if you're studying, because you won't have a client that you can work with. But actually, I think learning to communicate and to be able to talk to people and engage and to evolve or shape something with them, that in ways, we are often seen as, or I think that we should be seen as stimulators. We we go in to sugar them a bit, make them feel a bit uncomfortable about what their future might look like, and provoke questions and imagine with them together. And I think that's a really critical part for cultural projects. So much of what we do at the early stages is actually about talking to people, both the people, the client group, I suppose, but also all their audiences. And that in turn, with our really in-depth knowledge of the existing setting, whether there's an existing building or not, there's always a history, and pairing those two parts together just starts to allow us to imagine how we can reshape or shape these new settings. But again, I think it's that bit about transparency or ease of orientation, and then just about how you work all the bits, because there's a typical model of the core cultural destination, and then the cafe and the shop and all the sort of supporting bits that you need to cleverly arrange together. So it's just about understanding the essence of the project and where you can add a bit of interest and drama, as is sometimes the case, and a bit of joy. So that's really just all by understanding the people and the place, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting, the printmakers, because you're going through the section and you have so many views through and to things that kind of creates engagement and activity.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions. Was the sandstone on exterior of the last project tooled on site? What was the reasoning behind this?
The tooling of the stonework?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, as I mentioned, it was a subtle reference to the warp and weft of the tapestry. So I think that was an interesting one when you're designing for a collection. It was about taking the ideas of the collection that's inside and somehow imprinting them on the outside of the building. So that was just a subtle reference in the stonework to the tapestry at its heart.
Yeah, it's a very interesting project because you're starting kind of with the display.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, whereas it's usually
it's usually the other way. And I suppose it wasn't. We had to start. We had to solve the gallery as the first piece in that puzzle. We had to get. How would you display this huge linear tapestry? Because it takes up so much space, and it has to be in a sensible and logical manner, but also do much more than just be a simple display. So it was a really interesting one, starting with that, and then applying all the understanding and the understanding of the site and this approach to the town from above, which is also quite unusual. Coming in and seeing the roofscape, and how might we contribute to that with this new origami roofscape, which was really fun. Really challenge for the team delivering it, I have to say, but they're managing beautifully.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Another question from Scott here. How early do you typically engage clients on the topic of sustainability of a conservation or retrofit project, particularly in responding to environmental and social contexts? Do you have any advice on working with a client for future users' uses, and how do you walk through this with the client?
In sustainability terms, I think it's in the last 6 to 12 months, I think it's getting to the top of everybody's agenda, rightly so. And so, from bidding stage, we are being asked about our sustainable approaches. So it is absolutely at the forefront of all clients' minds, and is something that we've got a sustainability team in our studio, and we engage with lots of other sustainability practitioners, both through our M&E servicing and things, just to try and understand, I suppose, from the very beginning what the client aspirations are and how can we seek to exceed them. Because I think we all, as I said, have a duty to do more. So I'd say that is really probably one of the very first things now that we're talking about, along with then all the experiential aspects and other layers. There was another part to that question I don't think I've covered. What was it?
Just advice you have of walking a client or users through the sort of environmental and social aspects of.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the jargon bit is, how do you make that all easy for clients to understand? And I think, again, it's about communication, it's about us understanding what we want to do, and then it's about about trying to distill that down into a really clear way of communicating. I think, again, models are something that we use a lot for. It sounds a bit odd in terms of sustainability, but it's trying to find different media for clients to engage with. And even with our M&E engineers that we'll often bring in on projects, they're also thinking hard about how they demonstrate the impact of carbon or sustainability features on projects. So about also having that hard data that I mentioned quite a lot, can they distill our sustainability approach down into some really key facts and figures that, again, are palatable for the client and things that they can understand. So it's just about understanding, I suppose, the different methods of communicating that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's great. One thing you kind of talked about with the Leeds Playhouse, and then also kind of reusing some of the things from Edinburgh Printmakers, was the idea of using as found with the sort of like void place, and having still sort of like feeling of that space, but having a new use for those things. So reusing doors. But how do you decide what is worth keeping and what isn't worth keeping in these sort of projects?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really tricky question. That probably an extreme example of that was a project we did up outside St Andrews, a place called Cambo Estate. We actually delivered a new visitor centre for them there, which was in an existing stables building. And actually we wanted it to be almost as found. So it was almost like in the stable master from the 1800s had just walked out the door, and the walls are covered in dust and things, but that's actually what we wanted. And that, in terms of the bit that's really tricky in the delivery process in those projects, is putting costs against it, because often well, you don't know what you're going to find until you've got a contractor on board and you're starting to introduce new services, for example, and you need to unpick parts of it. So that bit is really tricky from a client perspective, particularly in publicly funded projects where they need to have cost certainty, but you're going into a building and you don't really know what you're going to find. If it might look okay in the surface, but actually behind it might be rotten, and then you need to take that off and replace the substrate. And you might need to replace parts then of the finish and all the money and complexity associated with doing all of that. So it's an exceptionally tricky balance. I think at Cambo, is a really interesting one, because we just worked with the contractor and went round site and agreed things. We would just agree that's not able to be saved, or actually there's potential in that. And they had the most incredible boat builder who was their lead joiner on that site, and he crafted all little bits that would dovetail in with existing pieces of timber, so that you could but we would then think about, do we want to express that as new and paint it differently, and how do we then leave our story or this new narrative that actually some parts are existing and some parts we've had to add. So there's all sorts of questions then are unearthed about that approach. But at Edinburgh Printmakers, we were really fortunate to have a client who, you know, they were so fixed on making sure that as many of the memories of the past life of the building were retained and expressed. So they allowed us to, you know, to work and retain and repurpose, you know, like the door fronts as tabletops and things, which, you know, many clients might say, well, it's actually much cheaper for us just to buy a brand new table, but actually there's much less value in that in so many other ways. So again, it's just about planting these seeds quite early on and about us really understanding again that building and what potential might exist in it.
Yeah, definitely. It's just really interesting sort of like touch, I guess.
Yeah.
We used like that. You kind of mentioned that you have like an in-house model maker. Is that kind of how you go through a lot of designing processes, model making? And you said these projects, quite a few of them have lots of different levels, and it's quite complicated levels to then sort of like unpick for accessibility. Is that kind of more the hardest part of redesigning these like retrofit projects, is trying to have them accessible for all?
Yeah, absolutely. We have we're so privileged to have him, Andy, our model maker. And as you say, he doesn't use CNC cutters or any machines or anything. He does it all by hand and crafts it, and that in itself gives a real authenticity, I think, to the models, but allows us to move much faster and be I suppose we just sort of go with the flow with our model making and see where it takes us. You know, you sort of can carve or sculpt a model in that way, a bit like you would a sketch, I suppose. So yeah, we try and make models of all our buildings, depending on how much pressure we can put on Andy, depending on what's going on at the time. So, but yeah, I think it's absolutely invaluable. And again, it's particularly in cultural projects, where we're sharing with community groups and things, to get them, they won't, I'll have done multiple presentations on PowerPoint and not have had a single question, but then as soon as the model comes out, they all rush towards it, and then all of a sudden it all makes sense, and it sort of unlocks in their mind, and the questions start flooding in. So yeah, I think that's an essential part of our process. Your second point was about unpicking levels and inclusive access, which I think is again something that's going up and up and up and on clients' agendas, rightly so. And again, yeah, absolutely is often the trickiest part, which is why sometimes with existing buildings we go down this battery pack model, as I mentioned, where actually it's almost impossible to negotiate all the levels in an inclusive manner without somehow decaying the relative significance of parts of the building. And that's where it's tricky with existing buildings, is understanding again what parts are really critical to the building's history or the story that the building has. And so that might lead us to actually saying we need to bolt a new piece on to unlock all these levels and to unlock access to all these different parts. So yeah, it's really tricky, particularly when you get on site and then you're trying to get all these different buildings of different ages to talk to each other and come together.
Yeah, definitely. So the question we had, do you...
I saw John had put a message just asking if the stone was tooled on site. It's tooled off site and then brought to site, just for practical terms, in terms of, this is it, sorry, talking about tapestry building. Often with urban sites, you don't have a lot of space round about to do any of these crafting skills. So it was all done off site and brought in.
That's really interesting. Any more questions from Eilidh? Like, a lot of the other stuff you were saying is that the buildings that you're making kind of have an adjacent sort of external space, and how they interact with them, and also interact with like the cityscape, and sort of like the back and the front of sort of these buildings. Is that something that you try to design, like a great relationship between the exterior and the interior?
Yeah, well, I suppose in Dundee, McManus Galleries is the best example of that, where I guess with every project that we do, we seek to do more than just our building, and to start conversations at least with how other areas might improve in time. And McManus is a classic example of that, where actually we had a really brilliant discussion with the planners and the roads department about how we could actually move cars away from the building altogether, which would then allow this civic building to have a proper proud front door again. It made the building work so much more effectively in itself, and then created this really lovely pedestrianised setting for the city. So I think that's probably an ideal example, and one many of you listening to this will know quite well. So I think it's critical for us all to take responsibility for what goes on outside our front door, and how can we enhance that, or start a conversation about enhancing that. A project, another example of that was where we weren't successful was in Edinburgh at St Cecilia's Hall, which is a museum of musical instruments and a concert hall, an A-listed building at the heart of the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Edinburgh, but opened out onto a really tight cobbled street, which in itself has all sorts of challenges from an accessibility perspective, and we really sought to try and pedestrianise that, and worked at the University of Edinburgh with our clients there, and we had long tough conversations with the planners who really wanted to do it, but it's ultimately it all comes down to money in the end, and I like to think that one day it will eventually be pedestrianised, and I suppose the positive impact of that building can ripple up and marry in with the Royal Mile, but it also takes time, building and working in the built environment takes a huge amount of time. So it's about having patience, I suppose, too.
Yeah. Was in these sort of like retrofit projects, was there anything that you found on the project that you then kind of have to integrate into the sort of final design? Was it any sort of like gems or any sort of hidden things?
I think on every building there's always something. For example, in St Cecilia's, we discovered when we were demolishing a part of it which was built in the 1960s to put a new extension, that actually the building next door had been constructed on the foundations that we were about to remove, so we had to redesign the whole structural strategy there so that we could retain those foundations and not make the building next door fall down. But then again, the project I mentioned at Cambo, something slightly different was we discovered sort of carvings in some of the stonework that were concealed, and we had planned to line out some of those walls, but then started to work again with this amazing boat builder carpenter who to cut holes in our new linings to reveal some of these beautiful artworks. And again, it's about that narrative and respecting the stories and these layers exist in buildings, which are so lovely for everybody coming into that building. They might think, we've not put any interpretation or signage to say what it is, but you just get that feeling of the sense that, this building has been part of people's lives for so long and had so many different uses. And I love that part of just discovery. But it's not always positive, and when you discover you've got to redesign your whole structural strategy to go ahead, and you've only got a week because our programme is going to be delayed by so much. So it's always a bit challenging.
Yeah, that does seem like
keeps us agile.
Yeah, a less fun finding that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's great. Thank you for coming along this evening.
Thanks for having me.
These questions. Thank you for coming along. And this is our final lecture of our 2020 season. So we'll join us again for our first lecture, which I think is the 29th of January or the Friday roundabout then. And that's on timber design initiatives. So thank you again for everyone joining,